She was standing at the altar dressed in white when she realized the groom wasn't coming. But someone was watching her from the back of the church, his uncle, a man with a devastating gaze who didn't look away for even a second. 7 years later, he reappeared. And this time he didn't come just to watch. He came to touch, to kiss, to possess. An indecent proposal, a marriage of convenience, and a forbidden desire that had been burning for so long that when it finally exploded, nothing else mattered. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the super thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue bringing stories that move you. Kate turned her head slowly, almost against her own will, as if something invisible was pulling her. And that's when her eyes met his. Philip, Daniel's uncle. The man she had only seen in photographs hanging in the family home, at formal dinners where he would appear briefly before disappearing on some business trip. He was standing at the back of the church, leaning slightly against one of the marble columns, his arms crossed over his broad chest. The dark suit molded to his body with a perfection that seemed intentional, as if even his clothes knew who was in command. But it wasn't the suit that held Kate's attention. It was his gaze, steady, piercing, devastating. He didn't look away when she stared at him. He didn't blink. He didn't smile with pity. He made no gesture of comfort or embarrassment. He just watched her, as if he were seeing something no one else could see, as if he were reading every layer of shame, pain, and confusion she was trying to hide beneath that bridal veil. The air around Kate seemed to grow warmer, thicker. She felt the flush rise up her neck, across her cheeks, not just from the public humiliation, but from something she couldn't name. Something dangerous, something that made her stomach tighten and her breath catch. He didn't look shocked or pitying, just attentive, as if he were seeing more than I was showing. Kate's hands were trembling now, but the heat in her chest wasn't just from shame. It was something deeper, more unsettling. A spark she had never felt before, not even with Daniel. "Kate," her mother's soft voice beside her brought her back. "Sweetheart, we need to get out of here." But Kate couldn't move, not yet. Not while those dark eyes remained fixed on her, as if holding her in place. Philip tilted his head slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture. It wasn't pity, it wasn't an apology, it was acknowledgement, as if he knew exactly what she was feeling and somehow shared in it. Then, for the first time since she'd arrived at the altar, Kate felt something beyond the pain. She felt fury, not at Daniel, not yet, but at herself, for believing, for hoping, for putting herself in that position. The anger burned fast and hot inside her, replacing the paralysis that had held her there. With an abrupt movement, Kate turned and began walking down the church aisle. Her heels echoed in the silence. The veil floated behind her like a cloud of surrender. The guests stepped aside, making way, but she didn't look at any of them, except when she passed Philip. Their eyes met again, and this time it was Kate who held the gaze, for just 2 seconds, but it was long enough to feel it again, that unbearable heat, that tension that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. He didn't say anything, he didn't need to. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, a half-smile that wasn't mocking, but understanding? Admiration? Kate didn't know. And she didn't have time to find out. She left the church with her head held high, the bouquet still clutched in her hand, and the sound of whispers exploding behind her like waves breaking on the shore. Outside, the sunlight blinded her for a moment. The fresh air touched her heated skin, bringing some relief but not enough to extinguish the fire still burning inside her. Her mother and her maid of honor quickly caught up with her, trying to support her, but Kate gently pushed them away. "I'm fine," she lied, her voice steadier than she expected. "I just want to go home." As the car pulled away, Kate looked through the rear window one last time. The church was getting smaller and smaller, but she could have sworn she saw a dark figure standing at the entrance. Philip. He was still watching her, and even miles away, even with the glass, the motion, and the chaos around her, Kate could still feel the weight of that gaze burning her skin. That night, alone in her apartment, Still wearing the wedding dress that now felt like a silk prison, Kate sat before the mirror. Her tears finally fell, not just for the humiliation, not just for Daniel, but for something she couldn't explain. Something had begun in that church, something she hadn't asked for, something she didn't want, something that deep down frightened her more than any abandonment. Because when her eyes had met Philip's, for the first time in her life, Kate felt that someone truly saw her. And that changed everything. 7 years, 2,555 days, 61,320 hours. Kate knew exactly how much time had passed since that day at the church, not because she counted obsessively, but because every milestone in her life since then had been measured from that moment. Before the altar, after the altar. She was a different woman now. The 23-year-old Kate, fragile and naive, had stayed behind in that church. The 30-year-old woman crossing the street toward the coffee shop was sharp, confident, impeccable. Her charcoal grey suit was tailored to perfection, embracing her curves with understated elegance. Her high heels, red, a deliberate choice, struck the ground with the steady rhythm of someone who knew exactly where she was going. She had rebuilt her life brick by brick. A strategic consulting firm, high-profile clients. Her name in business headlines, not in the society columns. No one called her the abandoned bride anymore. Now she was Kate Morrison, the woman who turned failing companies into profitable empires. The coffee shop was one of her favorite places, discreet, elegant, with Italian marble tables and soft lighting that was never too bright. She had a meeting scheduled with a potential client at 10 o'clock. 15 minutes early, as always. Kate pushed through the glass door, and the aroma of freshly ground coffee immediately enveloped her. She breathed deeply, allowing herself that small pleasure before switching back to professional mode. And then she saw him. Daniel. Time stopped. Not in a romantic way, but in the brutal way a car brakes before a collision. He was sitting at a table near the window, older, with some wrinkles around his eyes that hadn't been there before. His hair still blonde but less bright. His posture still arrogant, but somehow diminished. And he wasn't alone. A young woman, beautiful, pregnant, sat beside him, smiling as she scrolled through her phone. The world around Kate trembled, not from pain, not from anger, but from memory, from the violence of that memory coming back like a punch to the stomach. She took a deep breath, forcing her feet to move. Don't let him see. Don't let him know it matters. But it was too late. Daniel looked up and saw her. For a split second, something passed across his face. Guilt, surprise, fear. Kate couldn't decipher it. Didn't want to decipher it. She was about to look away, to move on, as if he were just another stranger, when she heard the voice. Kate. Deep, controlled, steady. She knew that voice. Kate turned slowly, and the air was ripped from her lungs. Philip. He was a few steps away from her, taller and more imposing than she remembered. The black suit was impeccable, the perfect cut highlighting broad shoulders and a posture that exuded silent command. His dark hair had some silver strands at the temples now, which only made him more devastatingly attractive. But it was his eyes that paralyzed her. Those same eyes. Dark, intense, piercing, as if the 7 years hadn't passed, as if he were still seeing everything she was hiding. "Philip," she managed to say, her voice coming out softer than she intended. He moved closer, and Kate felt the heat radiating from him. Not the physical warmth of a body, but something more visceral, something that made her heart race and her skin tingle. "Are you okay?" The question was simple, but the way he asked it, with his eyes fixed on hers, his voice low and intimate, wasn't. Kate wanted to say yes, wanted to smile and act as if Daniel were irrelevant, but under Philip's gaze, lies seemed impossible. "I am," she answered, lifting her chin slightly. "It's been a long time." 7 years, he said without hesitation, as if he'd been counting too. Kate's stomach tightened. Before she could respond, Daniel approached, hesitation evident in every step. "Kate, I didn't expect to see you here." She finally looked at him and felt nothing. No anger, no hurt. Just an emptiness where there had once been a wound. "Daniel." Her voice was polite, distant. "I hope you're well." He blinked, clearly surprised by her coldness. Yes. This is Amanda, my—" "You don't need to explain," Kate interrupted gently. "Really, you don't." Daniel's discomfort was palpable. He opened his mouth to say something, but Philip stepped forward, subtly placing himself between Kate and his nephew. "Daniel," Philip's voice was sharp as glass, "I think you have other commitments." It wasn't a question. It was an order. Daniel swallowed hard, looked at Kate one more time, perhaps hoping for— "What? Forgiveness? Absolution?" And then backed away. "Of course, it was good to see you, Kate." She didn't respond, just watched as he returned to the table, grabbed his things, and hurried out with the pregnant woman in tow. The silence that followed was thick, charged. Kate could feel Philip beside her, so close that the subtle scent of his cologne, something woody and masculine, invaded her senses. She closed her eyes for a brief second, trying to pull herself together. "Thank you," she said, finally looking at him, "but I didn't need to be rescued." The corner of Philip's mouth lifted in a half-smile. "I know. But I wanted to anyway." There was something in that smile, something that made Kate's heart beat irregularly. "You've changed," he said, his eyes traveling over her face, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun, the impeccable suit. "But you're still you. And what does that mean?" Kate asked, before she could stop herself. Philip took a step closer, so close she could see the small golden flecks in his dark eyes, so close she felt his warmth like a wave. "It means," he said, his voice low and husky, "that you're still the most fascinating woman I've ever seen." The world around them disappeared. The coffee shop, the customers, the barista making drinks, everything blurred until only he remained. He looked at me like someone who wanted to unravel everything I was hiding. And in that instant, part of me wanted to be unraveled. Kate opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Just the acute awareness of every inch of space between them, of the way his eyes dropped briefly to her lips before returning, of the way his breathing changed. "I need to go," she said finally, taking a step back before she did something insane. "I have a meeting." Of course. Philip didn't try to stop her, but something in his eyes said he didn't want to let her go. "Kate!" She stopped, looking over her shoulder. "If you need anything at all, call me." He held out a card. Kate took it, and when their fingers brushed, an electric current ran up her arm. She left the coffee shop without looking back, but she could feel his gaze burning on her skin. Like at that church, like 7 years ago. And when she reached her car, alone, Kate looked at the card in her hand and realized something frightening. She wanted to call, wanted to hear that voice again, wanted to feel that gaze on her. Something had awakened, something that had been asleep for 7 years, and Kate didn't know if it terrified her or thrilled her. The scandal broke within 48 hours. Kate woke up Monday morning with her phone exploding with notifications, articles, photos, screaming headlines that twisted the truth until they transformed it into something unrecognizable. Abandoned bride confronts ex at coffee shop. Has she never moved on? Kate Morrison, successful executive, still obsessed with the past? Daniel Foster and pregnant fiancé flee awkward encounter with ex-bride. Someone had taken photos. Someone had sold the story. And now the narrative Kate had so carefully constructed, the strong, independent woman who had turned the page, was being destroyed by a press hungry for drama. Clients started calling, not to hire, to cancel. "We need someone focused, Kate, without personal distractions. Maybe it's better if we wait until things settle down. You understand, don't you? Image is everything." She understood. She understood perfectly. And she understood that no matter how many companies she saved, how many contracts she signed, how many times she proved her worth, a single misinterpreted photo was enough to destroy years of work. By Wednesday night, Kate was in her apartment, surrounded by the heavy silence of defeat. She was still wearing her work clothes, but her heels were tossed beside the couch, and her perfect bun had come undone. She held a glass of red wine, watching the illuminated city through the panoramic window. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something, intuition, curiosity, fate, made her accept the call. "Kate Morrison." "It's Philip." His voice traveled through the line like a physical touch. Kate felt her entire body react, her breathing quickening, her heart racing, her skin warming. "How did you get my number?" she asked, trying to sound more controlled than she felt. "I have my resources." There was a touch of amusement in his voice. "Can I come up?" Kate looked around. The apartment was a reflection of her. Minimalist, elegant, controlled, nothing out of place, except herself. "Come up," she repeated, trying to buy time to process. "You're here. In your building's lobby, the doorman is quite protective, I must say. Won't let me pass without your authorization." Kate walked to the window, looking down. 20 floors below, she could see the building's entrance. And even from so far away, even without seeing him clearly, she knew it was him. Her finger hovered over the hang-up button. The rational part of her screamed to refuse, to keep her distance, to protect what remained of her sanity. But the part of her that had awakened in that coffee shop, the part that still felt the heat of his gaze, said yes. Apartment 2004. 15 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Kate opened the door, and there he was. Not in a suit this time, but in black dress pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong, tanned forearms. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it. He had a paper bag in one hand. "I brought coffee," he said, lifting the bag, "and croissants. Figured you hadn't eaten dinner." He was right. Kate couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten anything substantial. She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Philip crossed the threshold, and suddenly, the spacious apartment felt smaller. His presence filled the space in a way she couldn't explain. "Why are you here?" Kate asked, crossing her arms over her chest, more to protect herself than out of hostility. Philip placed the bag on the kitchen island, his movements calm and deliberate. Then he turned to face her. "I saw the articles." Of course he did. Everyone did. "And?" Kate lifted her chin, defiant. "And I thought you should know they're ridiculous lies. Anyone with half a brain knows that." "Apparently, my clients don't qualify," she replied, bitterness leaking into her voice. Philip moved closer, slowly, each step measured as if he were approaching something wild that might flee at any moment. "Kate," he said, stopping a few steps away from her, "I have a proposal." She arched an eyebrow. "What kind of proposal?" "Marry me." The silence that followed was absolute. Kate blinked, certain she'd heard wrong. "What?" "Marry me. Not for love. For strategy. For your reputation. To control the narrative." She let out a humorless laugh. "You're serious?" "Completely." Philip took another step, so close now that she had to tilt her head back to face him. "Think about it. You're not obsessed with the past. You moved on, so far on that you married someone else. Someone successful, powerful, someone who, incidentally, puts my idiot nephew in his place." "This is insane," Kate murmured, but her mind was already processing, analyzing, seeing the angles. "It's strategic," Philip corrected. "You get your reputation back. He paused, his eyes darkening. "I get something I've wanted for a long time." Kate's heart stopped. "What?" He extended his hand and his fingers touched hers as he handed her a card. Not a business card this time, but something more personal. An invitation. The touch was electric, sending waves of heat up Kate's arm. "You," he said simply, his voice husky and low. "I want you protected, and if possible, much closer to me than this." Kate looked at the invitation in her hand, then at him. Philip's eyes burned with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why now?" Philip took the final step, eliminating the space between them. She could feel the heat of his body, the scent that enveloped her, the strength contained in every muscle. "Because," he said, his hand rising to touch her face, just his fingertips grazing her cheek, but enough to make her entire body tremble. "Since that day at the church, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. About how you stood up, about how you rebuilt, about how you are devastatingly magnetic." His fingers traced a delicate line along her jaw, down her neck, stopping at the racing pulse in her throat. "I feel it," he murmured, his thumb pressing lightly over the point where her heart was beating wildly. "You feel it too." Kate couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel. "What if I say no?" she managed to ask, though her voice came out shaky. Philip leaned in, his face so close their lips almost touched. She could feel his breath mixing with hers. "Then I'll leave," he said softly, "and you'll keep fighting alone. But I think—" His fingers tightened slightly on her waist, pulling her a millimeter closer. "I think you're tired of fighting alone." He was right. God, he was so right. "How much time do I have to think?" Kate asked, though she already knew the answer. "As much time as you need." Philip pulled away, and the immediate cold where his warmth had been was almost painful. "But Kate, the offer expires when the media completely destroys what you've built, and we both know that can happen faster than you think." He walked to the door, stopped, looked back. "Think about it. And when you decide, call me." The door closed behind him, and Kate stood there, alone, trembling. She looked at the card in her hand, at the coffee and croissants on the island, at her own reflection in the window, a woman who looked strong but who was breaking inside. And then she looked at her phone. The decision was already made. She just needed to admit it. Kate called the next morning, not because she'd slept and woken up with clarity. She hadn't slept. She'd spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, weighing every word Philip had said, every touch that still burned on her skin, every logical reason to say no, and the one illogical, dangerous, impossible to ignore reason to say yes. She wanted him. Not just the protection, not just the strategy. She wanted him. And that truth terrified her more than any headline could. His voice answered on the second ring. "Kate." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. As if he knew she would call. As if he'd been waiting. "I accept," she said, her voice steady despite the internal chaos, "but with conditions. I'm listening. This is an arrangement. Nothing more. We keep up appearances, rebuild my reputation, and when everything settles down, we go our separate ways. Clean, simple, no complications." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only 2 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. "I agree to your terms," Philip said finally. "We'll meet this afternoon, 3 o'clock. I'll take care of everything." Everything? Everything. And he really did take care of everything. 4 hours later, Kate was standing before a justice of the peace in a discreet office downtown. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, just her, Philip, 2 witnesses he'd arranged, and the crushing weight of what they were about to do. Kate wore a simple cream-colored dress, elegant, but not bridal. She'd learned the first time that wedding dresses didn't guarantee happy endings. Philip was in a dark grey suit, impeccable as always, but there was something different in his eyes when he looked at her. Hunger. Not the obvious, crude kind, but something deeper, more patient, as if he were savoring every second, every glance, every shared breath. The judge began the ceremony, but Kate barely heard the words. She was hyper-aware of Philip beside her, of his proximity, of the heat radiating from his body, of the way he didn't look away from her for even an instant. "Do you, Philip James Foster, take Kate Eleanor Morrison to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was deep, steady, loaded with something that made Kate's stomach tighten. "And do you, Kate Eleanor Morrison, take Philip James Foster to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Kate took a deep breath. This was the moment, the last chance to back out, to choose safety over the unknown. But when she looked at Philip, when she saw the way he watched her, not with possession, but with something dangerously close to reverence, she knew. "I do." The words came out softer than she'd intended, almost a whisper. But in the quiet of that room, they sounded like thunder. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." The judge smiled. "You may kiss the bride." The air changed, became denser, hotter. Philip took a step toward her, his eyes darkening. Kate felt her heart race, pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. It should be formal, she thought, quick, just for appearances. But when his hand rose to touch her face, his fingers sliding along the side of her neck until they rested at her nape, she knew it wouldn't be anything like that. Philip leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back. But Kate didn't pull back. She couldn't. She was trapped in his gaze, in the silent promise she saw there. Then his lips touched hers, and the world caught fire. The kiss started soft, almost chaste, but it lasted only a second before deepening. The hand at her nape tightened, pulling her closer. His other hand found her waist, firm fingers pressing against the fabric of her dress, as if he needed to feel the reality of her beneath his hands. Kate sighed against his mouth, and Philip took advantage, deepening the kiss even more. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't polite, it was hunger, desire. 7 years of unresolved tension exploding in that touch. Kate's hands rose instinctively, grabbing the lapels of his suit, pulling him closer, as if the distance, however small, physically hurt. She could feel everything, his heat, the strength contained in every muscle, the way he trembled slightly as if holding himself back, his taste, coffee and something darker, more addictive. When they finally separated, both their breathing was ragged. Philip pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes still closed as if trying to compose himself. "Kate," he murmured, his voice husky and low, just for her. "You have no idea how much—" He stopped, opening his eyes, and what Kate saw there made her forget how to breathe. Desire, yes, but also something more dangerous, something deeper, possessiveness. "Now you carry my name, Kate," he whispered, his thumb caressing her cheek, "and my name protects what's mine." What's mine? The words should have irritated her, should have sounded controlling, outdated, but instead they sent a wave of heat through her. Because in the way he said it, with that intensity, that absolute certainty, it didn't feel like possession. It felt like a promise. Kate opened her mouth to respond, but the words died when she saw the way he looked at her, as if she were precious, rare, his. "Let's go," Philip said finally, intertwining his fingers with hers. "We have a world to face." They left the office together, hand in hand, and when the camera flashes, because of course there were cameras, Philip had made sure of that, exploded around them, Kate didn't flinch. She lifted her chin, squeezed Philip's hand, and smiled. Because for the first time in 7 years she wasn't just surviving, she was living. In the car, after the crowd of reporters was left behind, a comfortable silence settled in. Philip drove with one hand, the other still intertwined with Kate's, resting on her thigh. She looked at their joined hands, at the simple white gold band on her finger. Something so small, but that changed everything. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My house," Philip answered, glancing briefly at her before returning his eyes to the road. "Our house now. Our house." The words sent a shiver down Kate's spine. Not of fear, but of anticipation. "Philip," she said softly, "what did we just do?" He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity of the earlier kiss. "We took the first step," he murmured against her skin, "towards something that should have started 7 years ago." Kate closed her eyes, allowing herself just for a moment to believe this could be more than an arrangement, more than strategy, that maybe, just maybe, that kiss wasn't just for the cameras. And when Philip squeezed her hand, she squeezed back. Because even if she told herself it was just an arrangement, her body knew the truth. She had married him, kissed him, felt him, and now, going to his house, their house, Kate realized something that made her shiver. She didn't want it to be just an arrangement. She wanted more, and that realization changed absolutely everything. Philip's house wasn't just a house. It was a statement. Located in one of the most exclusive areas of the city, the property stretched across nearly 5 acres of perfectly manicured gardens, an infinity pool that seemed to merge with the horizon, and modern architecture that mixed glass, concrete and wood so harmoniously it seemed to have grown naturally from the ground. Kate stepped out of the car and simply stopped, absorbing everything. The magnitude, the beauty, the striking loneliness of something so large for just one person. "It's a lot," Philip said behind her, his voice carrying a note of something that sounded almost like vulnerability. "But I thought you might like the space. The quiet." He was right. She did. In the days that followed, Kate discovered that living with Philip was like walking a tightrope. Every moment brought a new tension, a new test of self-control that she felt she was slowly failing. Mornings were the worst, or the best. Kate still hadn't decided. She would wake up and go downstairs to the kitchen, expecting to find the house empty. Philip seemed like the type of man who started his day at 5 in the morning. But he was always there. At the kitchen island, drinking coffee, reading reports on his tablet, wearing reading glasses that made him look absurdly attractive. "Good morning," he would say every morning, looking up when she entered. And every morning, Kate felt that gaze like a physical touch. On the first morning, she kept her distance, pouring her own coffee from the other side of the kitchen. But Philip stood up, walked over to her, and with a gesture so natural it seemed rehearsed, brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sleep well?" he asked, his fingers lingering a second too long on the side of her neck. Kate had forgotten how to breathe for a moment. "Yes," she lied, because in reality, she'd spent the entire night aware that he was just a few rooms away. He smiled as if he knew, as if he could read every thought passing through her mind. "Great," he murmured, and then returned to his coffee, leaving Kate trembling in place. That became a pattern. Every morning, a touch, a strand of hair tucked back, a hand on the small of her back when he passed by her, a whispered "good morning" so close to her ear she could feel his breath on her skin. Every time he tucked my hair behind my ear, I forgot my own name. And it wasn't just the mornings. There were the dinners they prepared together, or tried to prepare. Philip was surprisingly skilled in the kitchen, and Kate discovered that watching him chop vegetables with surgical precision was inexplicably fascinating. One night, while she was trying to reach a bowl on the top shelf, Philip appeared behind her, so close his body almost touched hers. He reached up over her head, getting the bowl easily, but didn't move away immediately. "Here," he said, his deep voice sounding too close, too intimate. Kate turned, and suddenly she was trapped between the counter and his body. Not in a threatening way. He kept enough space for her to breathe, but not enough for her to think clearly. "Thank you," she managed to say, accepting the bowl. Philip's eyes dropped to her lips, for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough to make Kate's heart race. "You're welcome," he murmured, and then moved away, leaving her with weak knees and irregular breathing. There were also the social events. As Philip Foster's wife, Kate suddenly found herself being invited to galas, charity dinners, business parties, where everyone watched her with barely disguised curiosity. The abandoned bride who captured the city's most coveted billionaire bachelor. Philip never let her face those stares alone. At every event, he was by her side. Not just physically, but in all the ways that mattered. His hand remained firmly on the small of her back, his fingers applying gentle pressure that said, "I'm here." When someone asked an impertinent question, he intervened with a response so sharp and charming the person immediately backed down. And when they danced, because there was always dancing, Philip held her as if she were made of something precious. One night, at a particularly opulent gala, the music slowed to something slow and intimate. Philip pulled her onto the dance floor, one hand finding her waist, the other intertwining with hers. "You're tense," he observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear above the music. "I'm being watched," Kate replied, aware of the curious stares around them. "Let them watch." Philip pulled her a millimeter closer, eliminating the polite space they'd maintained. "Let them see that you're mine." Mine, that word again, possessive, definitive, dangerous. Kate looked up to meet his eyes. "Philip, this is just an arrangement?" He finished for her, an eyebrow arching. "Is that what you're still telling yourself?" She had no answer, because the truth, the frightening, undeniable truth, was that it had stopped feeling like an arrangement weeks ago. Philip must have seen something in her face, because his eyes darkened. The hand on her waist slid slightly, his thumb finding the bare skin where the dress had a subtle cutout. The touch was like fire. Kate gasped, a low, involuntary sound, and saw Philip's jaw clench. "You feel it, don't you?" he murmured, his face so close she could count every eyelash. "This thing between us." "Philip." "Kate." The name came out like a prayer, like a warning. "If we keep going like this, if you keep looking at me that way, touching me like you don't want to stop, I won't be able to keep this just professional. Her heart stopped. What if I don't want it to be professional? His fingers tightened on her waist. His eyes burned into hers. Then you need to tell me, he said, his voice hoarse. Because I'm hanging on by a thread here, Kate, and you have no idea how much I want to... He stopped abruptly, as if the words were too dangerous to say out loud. But Kate knew. She knew because she felt the same. The music ended, but they didn't separate immediately. They remained there in the middle of the dance floor, bodies pressed together, breaths mingling, the world around them completely forgotten. It was only when someone bumped into them that the spell broke. Philip guided her back to their table, his hand never leaving her waist. Even when they sat, he kept his chair too close, his thigh pressing against hers under the table. Kate could barely concentrate for the rest of the night. She was hyper-aware of every point where their bodies touched, of the way Philip occasionally ran his thumb in slow circles on her thigh, of the way he leaned in to whisper comments in her ear, his mouth dangerously close. When they finally returned home, the tension in the car was almost unbearable. Philip drove with his jaw clenched, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Kate looked out the window but saw nothing. She only felt the heat still burning where he'd touched, felt the anticipation building like a storm. When they arrived, he got out first, walking around the car to open her door. When he extended his hand to help her out, Kate took it and didn't let go. They walked to the front door, hands intertwined, neither saying a word. The silence vibrated between them, charged with unspoken promises. At the entrance, Philip finally stopped. He turned to face her, and Kate saw everything written on his face, the desire, the conflict, the almost painful need. "Kate," he began, his voice rough, "if you go up those stairs with me now, if you come into my room, I won't be able to let you go." Her heart was pounding so hard it hurt. "What if I don't want to leave?" His breath caught. For a long moment he just looked at her, as if memorizing every detail of her face. Then, slowly, he brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with a reverence that made tears sting Kate's eyes. "Then good night, Kate," he whispered, "because if I stay here one more second, I won't respect the time you clearly still need." He climbed the stairs, leaving Kate alone in the hall, trembling, and for the first time since they'd married, Kate realized something important. She didn't want more time. She wanted him. Now. And the next time he touched her like that, she wouldn't let him walk away. Kate should have known Daniel wouldn't stay quiet forever. 3 weeks after the wedding, the careful peace she and Philip had built was brutally shattered. It was a Friday night. Philip had a business dinner that would run late, and Kate had decided to stay home, taking advantage of the solitude to work on a project that required total concentration. She was in the library, her favorite place in the house with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a huge window overlooking the lit garden, when she heard the doorbell. She frowned. The doorman never let anyone up without calling first. But when she opened the door, she understood why. Daniel was there, stumbling, reeking of whiskey, his eyes red and glazed over. "Kate," he said, his voice slurred, "we need to talk." She should have closed the door, should have called security. But surprise paralyzed her for just a second, and it was enough time for Daniel to push the door open and come in. "Daniel, you need to leave," Kate said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Now. Not before you hear me out." He stumbled slightly, leaning against the wall. You married him? My uncle? That's none of your business." "None of my business?" Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "I was going to marry you, Kate. You were mine." "I was never yours," Kate replied, anger beginning to replace fear. "You made sure of that when you didn't show up at the church. I made a mistake." He took a step toward her, and Kate instinctively backed away. "I was scared, confused, but couldn't you wait? Couldn't you give me a second chance? Instead, you run into his arms." "Leave. Now." Kate pointed at the door, her voice sharp as glass. But Daniel didn't move. Instead, he took another step, and another. The fury in his eyes was mixed with something darker, more dangerous. "You think he cares about you?" Daniel spat. "You're just a trophy to him, a way to rub it in my face that he always wins. You don't know anything about us." "I know he doesn't deserve you," Daniel shouted, lunging forward. Kate backed up again, but this time her back hit the wall. Daniel was too close now, way too close, and panic began rising in her throat. "Daniel, stop! You should have waited for me," he murmured, reaching his hand toward her face. "We should be together. Not you and him. Us." His hand was inches from touching her face when a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Take your hands off her." Kate had never heard Philip use that tone. Ice cold, deadly. Each word enunciated with surgical precision, but loaded with a restrained violence that made her blood run cold. Daniel spun around, nearly falling in the process. Philip stood in the library entrance, and the sight of him made Kate forget how to breathe. He'd dropped his jacket somewhere. His white shirt had the first few buttons undone, sleeves rolled up. But it was his eyes, dark, furious, dangerous, that made it seem like he could kill someone with his bare hands. "Uncle Philip," Daniel began, but his voice failed when Philip took a step toward him. "You have 3 seconds to get out of my house," Philip said, each word dripping with threat, "before I throw you out personally. And believe me, Daniel, you don't want me to do that." Daniel looked between the two of them, seeing for the first time Kate's expression, not fear of Philip's uncle, but relief, and that seemed to break something in him. "She'll never love you," he spat venomously. "You're too old, too cold, too controlling." He didn't even finish the sentence before Philip crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed him by the collar. "I warned you," Philip said, his voice low and dangerous. And then, with surprising strength, he dragged Daniel out of the library, down the hallway to the front door. Kate followed them, her heart pounding wildly. She watched as Philip shoved Daniel outside, the younger man stumbling backward. "If you come within 5 feet of her again," Philip said, each word a deadly promise, "there won't be a conversation. There won't be warnings. Understood?" Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but something in Philip's look must have convinced him to stay quiet. He turned and left, stumbling along the way. Philip slammed the door hard enough to make the house shake. For a long moment, he just stood there, his back to her, hands braced on the door, head down. Kate could see the tension in every line of his body, the way he was breathing deeply, trying to control himself. "Philip," she said softly. He turned, and what Kate saw in his face made her take a step back. Not from fear, from intensity. His eyes burned. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles jumped. His hands, still fisted at his sides, trembled slightly. "Are you okay?" His voice came out hoarse, rough, as if each word cost him. "I am," Kate answered, though she was still shaking. Philip crossed the space between them in 2 steps. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs stroking her cheeks with a gentleness that contrasted violently with the fury she'd seen moments before. "Are you okay?" he repeated, his eyes searching every inch of her face as if looking for any sign of harm. "I am," she said again, more firmly this time. "Now that you're here." Something passed over his face. Relief, gratitude, and something deeper, darker. "If he had touched you, Kate." Philip stopped, closing his eyes for a moment. "If he had hurt you in any way, I would have done unforgivable things." Kate believed him. She could see it in the tense lines of his body, in the way his hands trembled slightly against her face. Philip Foster, the man always in control, always composed, was on the verge of completely losing it, because of her. "But he didn't touch me," Kate said softly, covering his hands with hers. "You got here in time." Philip's eyes opened, meeting hers. And in that look, Kate saw everything. The fear he'd felt when he got the call from security saying Daniel had forced his way in, the adrenaline pumping through him during the race home, the devastating relief at finding her unharmed. "You can't—" His voice failed. He took a deep breath, trying again. "You can't scare me like that, Kate. When that call came, when I thought he might— I've never been so scared in my life." The words hit her like a physical blow, because Philip wasn't a man to admit fear, wasn't a man to show vulnerability, unless it was real. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have called you right away when I saw it was him." "No." Philip shook his head, one hand sliding from her face to the nape of her neck, fingers threading through her hair. "You don't have to apologize. He shouldn't have been here. He should never have—" He stopped again, jaw tightening. Kate could feel the tension rolling off him in waves. "Philip," she said, her voice as soft as she could make it. "I'm okay. I'm here. With you." Something broke in his expression. The hand at her nape tightened, pulling her closer. His other hand found her waist, fingers closing against the fabric of her blouse. He pulled her against his body, and Kate went willingly, her hands rising to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart pounding wildly beneath her palms, could feel the restrained strength in his muscles, the way he was holding himself back. "Kate," he murmured, his face so close she felt every word against her skin. "Tell me to walk away." "Why?" she whispered back. "Because if you don't—" His fingers tightened on her waist, pulling her even closer until there was no space between them. "If you don't stop me now, I won't be able to keep this platonic for one more second." Kate's heart raced, not from fear, from anticipation. "What if I don't want you to stop?" His breath caught. She felt the exact moment his control snapped, saw it in his darkening eyes, felt it in the way his fingers dug into her waist, heard it in the low groan that escaped his throat. "Kate," he warned, but his mouth was already descending toward hers. "Don't stop," she whispered against his lips, and he didn't. The kiss was different from the one at the ceremony. It wasn't for show. It wasn't to convince anyone. It was just for them. Philip kissed her like a starving man, like someone who'd held back for too long and had finally been given permission to feel. His mouth moved against hers with a hunger that made Kate's knees weak. She clung to him, hands sliding up his broad shoulders until they buried themselves in his hair. She pulled him even closer, even though there was no space left, and heard the rough sound he made in response. Philip's hands explored her now, sliding down her back, tracing the curve of her waist, fingers finding bare skin beneath the hem of her blouse. Each touch was fire, each caress a promise. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, trembling. Philip rested his forehead against hers, eyes still closed as if he needed a moment to compose himself. "This changes everything," he said, his voice hoarse. Kate knew they had crossed a line that couldn't be undone, and she didn't care. "I know," she whispered. He opened his eyes, and what she saw there made her shiver. Desire, possessiveness, and something that looked dangerously close to love. They didn't talk about the kiss. Not that night, as Philip gently guided her to her bedroom, kissing her forehead before pulling away with an expression of painful conflict. Not the next day, when they moved through the house like two magnets, always aware, always drawn, but maintaining a careful distance. Not in the week that followed, as the tension grew and grew until the air between them seemed to vibrate. But the silence didn't erase the truth. Something had changed. Something fundamental, irrevocable, dangerous. Kate felt it in every look Philip sent her way, longer, more intense, more exposed. Felt it in the way he found reasons to touch her, adjusting the necklace at her neck before an event, guiding her with his hand at the small of her back, running his fingers over hers when he thought no one was watching. And Philip must have felt it too, because she caught him watching her when he thought she didn't notice, saw the way his jaw tightened when she laughed at something someone else said, saw how his eyes darkened when she came down the stairs dressed for dinner. They were walking a tightrope, and they both knew it was only a matter of time before they fell. The fall came on a Tuesday night. Philip was in the library, the same place where everything had nearly exploded a week earlier. Kate found him there, leaning back in one of the leather armchairs, a glass of whiskey in one hand and a book in the other. The soft light from the fireplace danced across his face, creating shadows that made him look even more intense. He looked up when she entered, and something passed between them. Quick as lightning, but impossible to ignore. "Can't sleep?" he asked, marking his page and closing the book. Kate shook her head, crossing her arms over her chest. More to protect herself than from cold. "My mind won't shut off. Thinking about what? About you. About us. About what we're pretending isn't happening. Business," she lied. Philip smiled, not with amusement, but with understanding, as if he knew exactly what she wasn't saying. "Come here," he said, patting the space beside him. Kate hesitated, because she knew that getting close to him now, in this light, in this silence, in this state of mind, would be dangerous. But she went anyway. She sat down beside him, keeping a few inches of distance. Philip didn't try to close them, just stayed there, sipping his whiskey, his profile illuminated by the fire. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. "Regret what?" "Saying yes, marrying me." Kate turned to look at him. Really look at him. The lines of tension around his eyes, the way he held his glass too tightly, the vulnerability he rarely let show. "No," she said honestly. "Never." Philip closed his eyes for a moment, as if her words were a physical relief. When he opened them again, he was staring at her with that intensity that made her forget her own name. "You feel it, don't you?" he said, echoing the words he'd spoken on the dance floor weeks ago. "This, thing between us." Kate's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Philip, don't lie to me, Kate." He set his glass on the side table, turning his whole body toward her. "Not now, not when we're alone." She took a deep breath, trying to find courage. "Yes, I feel it." "Since when?" The question caught her off guard. She wanted to lie, say it had started recently. But under that gaze, lies died before they were born. "Since that day," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "At the church, when you looked at me like you saw me. Really saw me." Something broke in Philip's face. He leaned forward, eliminating the space she'd kept so carefully. "I did see you," he said, his hand rising to touch her face. "I saw a woman who was too strong to break. I saw someone who deserved so much more than she was getting. And yes, Kate, I wanted you from that moment, even knowing it was wrong, even knowing you were my nephew's fiancée. I wanted you." His words were like fire on Kate's skin. 7 years. He'd felt this for 7 years. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she asked, trembling. "Because you needed time, needed to rebuild yourself. I wasn't going to take advantage of that." His fingers traced the line of her jaw, sliding down her neck. "But now you're my wife. And I can't pretend anymore that this is just an arrangement. Philip, if you ask me to, I'll stop." He leaned even closer, his nose brushing against hers. Their breaths mingled. "If you tell me it's too soon, that you're not ready, I'll wait. But Kate..." His voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. "Please don't ask me to stop." Kate should have been sensible. Should have asked for more time. Should have set boundaries. But when she looked into his eyes and saw everything there, the desire, the need, the love he was trying to hide, and failing miserably, she knew. She didn't want him to stop. "Don't stop," she whispered. And the world exploded. The kiss was devastating. Philip pulled her into his lap in one fluid motion, his hands framing her face while his mouth claimed hers with a hunger that stole the air from her lungs. Kate melted against him, hands burying themselves in his hair, pulling him closer, deeper. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was 7 years of unresolved tension finally breaking free. Philip's hands slid from her face to her neck, down her shoulders, tracing the curve of her waist before closing on her hips. He held her tightly, as if afraid she might disappear. Kate arched against him, a low sound escaping her throat. She felt Philip tremble in response, his hands tightening even more. "Kate," he murmured against her lips, his voice rough and desperate, "if you want to stop, you need to say so now, because in a few more seconds I won't be able to—" "I don't want to stop," she gasped, pulling him back to her. "I don't. I just want you." He groaned, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down her entire spine. Then, in one swift motion, he stood up, taking her with him. Kate wrapped her legs around his waist instinctively, and Philip held her easily, one hand under her thighs, the other still at her waist. "My room," he said against her lips. "Now." He carried her through the house, up the stairs with urgency but not carelessness. With each step he paused to kiss her again, as if he couldn't stop, as if every second without his lips on hers was physically painful. Kate matched every kiss with equal fervor. Her hands explored his broad shoulders, feeling the muscles flex beneath his shirt. She wanted to feel skin, wanted to feel everything. When they reached his room, a space she'd never entered, but that instantly became the most important one in the house, Philip set her gently on the floor. For a moment they just stood there looking at each other. Moonlight streamed through the huge window, bathing them in silver. "Last chance," Philip said, his voice hoarse but serious. "If you're not sure—" Kate cut him off with a kiss. Not gentle, not questioning, definitive. "I'm sure," she said against his lips. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Something broke in him. She saw it, felt it. Philip's hands went to the buttons of her blouse, unbuttoning them with surprisingly steady hands, despite the obvious urgency. Each button that came undone revealed more skin, and he paused to kiss every inch discovered. Her collarbone, the space between her ribs, the soft curve of her stomach. Kate trembled under his touch, her hands going to his shirt, pulling it out of his pants, frantically unbuttoning. When she finally managed to open it, revealing his muscular chest, she couldn't resist. She ran her hands over the warm skin, feeling his heart beating wildly. "You're beautiful," Philip murmured, his eyes traveling over every inch of her. So incredibly beautiful. He pulled her to him again, and this time when they kissed, it was skin against skin. The heat was overwhelming, consuming. Philip guided her gently toward the bed, laying her down with a reverence that contrasted with the urgency of moments before. He leaned over her, supporting himself on his elbows, his eyes searching her face. "Tell me if you want to stop," he said, even as his hands traced patterns of fire across her body. "At any moment. Tell me." "I don't want to," Kate whispered, pulling him down. "I don't want to stop, not now, not ever." And then there were no more words, only touches, kisses, whispers of names in the dark. Philip explored her as if he were memorizing every curve, every sigh, every reaction. His hands were both gentle and possessive, caressing, holding, claiming. Kate lost herself in him, in his heat, in his strength, in the way he murmured her name like a prayer. When they finally joined together, it was like coming home, like finding something she didn't even know she'd been looking for. "Kate," Philip whispered against her ear, his voice broken. "You're mine." "I always was," she replied, her nails marking his back. "I always was, even when I tried not to be." They moved together, perfectly in sync, as if they'd been made for this moment, for each other. And when they reached the edge together, Kate knew. This had never been an arrangement. This had always been love. The world was still spinning outside, but inside that room time had stopped. Kate lay beside Philip, her breathing finally beginning to calm, her heart still pounding hard against her ribs. Moonlight traced silver lines through the curtains, illuminating pieces of him, the strong line of his jaw, his chest rising and falling, the hand that still rested possessively at her waist. She'd never felt like this before. Complete, safe, seen. Philip turned his head, his eyes finding hers in the dark. There was something different in them now, not just desire, though that still burned low and steady, but also tenderness, vulnerability, as if he'd removed the last mask and had nowhere left to hide. "Hi," he said softly, a half smile curving his lips. "Hi," Kate replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks despite everything that had just happened. His hand at her waist tightened slightly, pulling her closer until there was no space between their bodies. Kate went willingly, fitting against him as if she'd been made for that specific space. "Are you okay?" Philip asked, his voice carrying a note of concern. "I wasn't too." "You were perfect," Kate interrupted, placing a finger on his lips. "More than perfect." He kissed her finger, then her palm, then the pulse point at her wrist, where her heart still beat rapidly. Each kiss was slow, deliberate, reverent. "I waited 7 years for this," he murmured against her skin. 7 years imagining what it would be like to have you like this. And still, he lifted his eyes to meet hers. Reality is infinitely better than any fantasy. Kate felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness but from something bigger, from recognition, from relief, from love. "Philip," she began, but her voice failed. He must have seen something in her expression, because he leaned in to kiss her. not with the urgency from before, but with a sweetness that broke her and rebuilt her at the same time. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered against her lips. "Not yet. I can wait." But Kate didn't want to wait, not anymore. "I love you," she said, the words coming out as naturally as breathing. I think I always have. Since that day. Since that look. I was just too scared to admit it." Philip closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there were tears shining in them. Tears he didn't try to hide. "Kate," he said, his voice breaking, "I love you. I love you so much it sometimes hurts to breathe. I've loved you since the moment I saw you at that altar, breaking and yet still so strong, and I'll love you until my last breath." This time it was Kate who kissed him, deeply, completely, pouring every emotion she couldn't put into words into that touch. When they separated, they were both trembling again. "Stay here," Philip said, kissing her forehead before getting up from the bed. Kate watched as he walked to the bathroom, shamelessly admiring the lines of his body, the way his muscles flexed with each movement. Moments later he returned with a soft robe, helping her into it with a gentleness that contrasted with the passion of minutes before. "Come," he said, extending his hand. She accepted it, letting him guide her to the private balcony that extended from his room. The view was breathtaking, the city glittering in the distance, stars dotting the sky above, the illuminated garden below. Philip pulled her into his arms, her back against his chest, his arms wrapping around her waist. They stood there in silence, just existing together. "What happens now?" Kate asked eventually, her voice almost carried away by the breeze. "Now," Philip said, kissing the side of her neck, "we live. We stop pretending, we stop hiding, we just live. And the arrangement?" She felt his smile against her skin. "What arrangement?" Kate laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "The fake marriage arrangement we made." "Oh, that one." Philip pretended to think, one eyebrow arching. "I think we need to renegotiate the terms." "Is that so?" Kate wrapped her arms around his neck. "And what would the new terms be?" "Well," he said, his hands finding her waist, "first, this is no longer temporary, it's permanent. Forever, if you'll agree." "I agree," Kate said without hesitation. "Second, no more separate bedrooms. You sleep here, with me every night." "I agree." "Third," Philip leaned in, his lips brushing hers, "I'm going to love you every day for the rest of our lives, and you're going to let me." "I agree," Kate whispered, sealing the deal with a kiss. They returned to the bed eventually, but not to sleep. Not yet. Philip explored her again, but this time it was different. There was no rush, no desperate urgency, just the desire to know, to memorize, to worship. He kissed every inch of her skin, murmured words of love in secret places, made promises with his hands that his heart had already made. And Kate did the same. Traced the lines of his body with her fingers, with her lips, with whispers of how much she loved him, how much she wanted him, how much she needed him. "Tell me again," Philip asked eventually, his eyes burning into hers as he moved over her. "Tell me you love me." "I love you," Kate said, her hands caressing his face. "I love you. I love you. You're mine, Kate," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I always was," she replied, pulling him down. "I always was, even when I tried not to be." When they reached the edge this time, it was different, deeper, more meaningful, because it wasn't just their bodies joining, it was their souls finally recognizing each other. Afterward, lying intertwined, covered only by sheets and moonlight, Philip traced lazy patterns on Kate's back. "You know when I realized?" he asked, his voice sleepy but happy. "Realized what?" "That I was a goner for you." He paused, his finger tracing her spine. "It was when you walked out of that church, head held high, steps steady, eyes dry. You were breaking inside, I could see it, but you didn't let anyone else see. And I thought you were the most extraordinary woman I'd ever met." Kate turned to face him, her eyes shining. "Why didn't you come after me, that day?" "Because you weren't ready," Philip said simply. "You needed to rebuild yourself first. I wasn't going to take that from you, but Kate," he ran his thumb over her bottom lip, "I never stopped waiting, never stopped looking, And when I saw you in that coffee shop 7 years later, so strong and so beautiful, I knew my wait was over. What if I hadn't accepted your proposal? I would have found another way, he admitted with a smile. I'm very stubborn when I want something, and I've always wanted you. Kate nestled closer, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I was so scared, she confessed, to feel this, to want you like this, because if it went wrong— It won't go wrong, Philip interrupted firmly, tilting her chin up until she was looking at him. I'm not going to abandon you, Kate. I'm not going to let you down. I'm not going to leave you. You're stuck with me now, understand? Promise? I promise. He sealed the promise with a kiss. With every part of me. I promise. Kate believed him. For the first time in 7 years, she let herself completely believe in someone. And when they finally fell asleep, intertwined, complete, satisfied, it was with smiles on their lips and peace in their hearts. Because they'd found something they both thought they'd never have. A home, a partner, a love. And now that they had it, they would never let go. The months that followed were the happiest of Kate's life. Not because everything was perfect. There were adjustments, small arguments about closet space, and the ideal air conditioning temperature, moments of insecurity that needed to be talked through. But because for the first time, Kate was building something real. Something hers. Something theirs. Mornings changed completely. Now, when Kate woke up, it was always with Philip's warmth beside her. Sometimes he was already awake, watching her sleep with an expression of tenderness that still made her blush. Other times, she woke first and spent minutes just admiring him, the relaxed lines of his face, the way his hair was slightly messy, how he instinctively pulled her closer even in deep sleep. "Good morning," he murmured every morning, his voice rough with sleep, before kissing her. Not quick or casual kisses, but the kind that said, "I missed you even while I was sleeping." And Kate always reciprocated, melting against him, her hands finding his chest, his neck, his hair. Some mornings, they didn't even leave the bed until late. They just stayed there, talking about everything and nothing, laughing at inside jokes only they understood, making love slowly as if they had all the time in the world. "I'm going to be late for my meeting," Kate complained without conviction, while Philip traced kisses along her shoulder. "Then be late," he murmured against her skin, making her laugh. "You're a bad influence, and you love it." She did. She loved everything about him, about them, about the life they were building together. Work remained important to Kate. She would never be the type to abandon her career for a relationship, and Philip not only understood that, but admired her for it. He encouraged her, supported her decisions, celebrated every victory as if it were his own. And when she came home after a difficult day, he was always there. With wine, with food, with open arms. "Tell me," he'd say, pulling her onto the couch, having her settle between his legs, her back against his chest. And she'd tell him about the difficult clients, the impossible deadlines, the small victories no one else would see. And Philip listened, really listened, asked questions, offered perspectives, massaged her tense shoulders while she talked. "You're incredible, you know that," he'd say, kissing the top of her head. "You're biased." Completely, and for good reason. There were also social events, which Kate used to dread, but now looked forward to, because going with Philip wasn't performative, it was genuine. He never left her alone. His hand was always at the small of her back or intertwined with hers, or absent-mindedly caressing her arm. And when someone tried to be rude or condescending, Philip intervened with a deadly elegance that made Kate want to kiss him right there. "You know I can defend myself," she'd say afterward, but smiling. "I know," Philip would reply, pulling her closer. "But why should you when I love doing it so much? And the nights. God, the nights. Every night ended the same way. In their bed, intertwined, whispering in the dark. Sometimes they made love with the same intensity as the first time. Other times they just held each other, fingers intertwined, hearts beating in sync. "Are you happy?" Philip would ask occasionally, as if he still needed confirmation. "Immensely," Kate always replied. "You? More than I ever imagined possible." It was during one of these nights, 3 months after finally admitting their feelings, that Kate realized something was different. Her body was changing. Subtly, but definitely, her breasts more sensitive, a slight morning nausea, a fatigue that no amount of coffee could shake. She took the test on a day when Philip was in meetings all day. She sat in the bathroom, hands trembling as she waited through the longest minutes of her life. When the second line appeared, clear and undeniable, Kate didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She did both. Pregnant. She was pregnant. They'd barely started their life together, and now... The initial panic lasted only a few minutes before being replaced by something different. Joy. Anticipation. Love. She was carrying Philip's child, a little piece of them growing inside her. When Philip came home that evening, he found her sitting in the living room, hands clasped in her lap, a nervous smile on her face. "Kate?" He dropped his briefcase immediately, crossing the room to her. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I am," she said quickly. "I'm more than okay. I just need to tell you something." Philip knelt in front of her, his hands finding hers. "You're scaring me." Kate pulled the test from her pocket, placing it in his hands without saying anything. She watched as he looked down, seeing the exact moment he understood. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, his hands trembled. "You're..." His voice failed. He swallowed hard, trying again. "We're pregnant," Kate finished, tears finally falling. "We're having a baby." Philip pulled her into his arms so fast she almost lost her balance. He held her like she was the most precious thing in the world, his face buried in her neck, and Kate felt when he started to shake. He was crying. Philip Foster, the man who controlled empires and intimidated competitors, was crying in her arms. "Philip," she whispered, her own tears falling freely now. He pulled back just enough to frame her face with his hands, and what Kate saw in his eyes broke her and rebuilt her at the same time. Pure joy, absolute love, overwhelming gratitude. "You..." He stopped, his voice choked. "You've given me everything, Kate, everything, and now this..." He placed his hand on her still flat stomach, his palms spread with reverence. "Our child. Our daughter," Kate corrected with a trembling smile. "I have a feeling." Philip laughed through his tears, kissing her with such tenderness that more tears fell. "Girl or boy, it doesn't matter," he said against her lips. "As long as the baby's healthy. As long as you're okay." "I will be," Kate promised. "We will be." That night, Philip was even gentler with her, kissed her stomach repeatedly, whispered words of love to the baby who couldn't yet hear, held Kate as if she might break. "I love you," he said for the 1,000th time. "I love you so much, Kate." "I love you too," she replied, running her fingers through his hair. Forever. The following months were a mix of preparations, heightened emotions, and love that only grew. Philip became absurdly protective. He insisted on accompanying her to every medical appointment, read books about pregnancy and parenting, started planning the baby's room with an enthusiasm that was both adorable and hilarious. "Philip, it's just paint," Kate said, laughing as he compared 15 different shades of soft grey. "It's not just paint," he argued seriously. "It's our child's first room. It needs to be perfect." And it was. Everything was perfect. When Kate started showing, Philip couldn't stop touching her belly. During breakfast, while watching TV in bed at night, his hands always found their way there, caressing, feeling, marveling. "Hi, little one," he'd whisper against her stomach. "It's Daddy. I can't wait to meet you." And when the baby started kicking, Philip was so emotional that Kate had to laugh from pure joy. "She's strong," he said in wonder, his palms spread where he'd felt the movement. "Like her mother," Kate replied. "Like both her parents," Philip corrected, kissing her. Life wasn't just about the baby, of course. They still had their careers, their individual dreams, their identities outside the relationship. But all of it was now wrapped in something bigger. Family. They were building a family. And for the first time in her life, Kate understood what it meant to belong completely to something. Not because she lost her independence, but because she chose to share her life with someone who saw her, valued her, loved her unconditionally. And Philip felt the same. She saw it in every look, every touch, every word whispered in the dark. "You're my greatest blessing," he said frequently. "You and our daughter." "And you're mine," Kate always replied, because it was true. He was her blessing, her love, her home. And she couldn't imagine life any other way. 20 years, 7,300 days since that kiss in the library that changed everything. Nearly 240,000 hours since they stopped pretending and started living. And yet, when Philip looked at Kate across the dinner table, with the soft candlelight dancing on her face, his heart beat as if it were the first time. Their daughter, Olivia, who Kate had been right to predict would be a girl, was in college now. 19 years old, brilliant, determined, and with her father's piercing eyes and her mother's quiet strength. The house was quieter without her, but not empty. Never empty. Not when Kate was there. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Kate asked, a smile playing on her lips as she took a sip of wine. "Like what?" Philip played innocent, though they both knew exactly what she meant. "Like I'm the only person in the world." "Because you are," he replied simply. "To me, you always have been." Kate shook her head, but the flush in her cheeks gave away how much those words still affected her. Even after 20 years, even after thousands of declarations of love. "You're impossible," she said, but she was smiling. "And you love me for it." "I love you in spite of it," she corrected, but they both knew it was a lie. Kate's company had become one of the most respected in the country. She was invited to speak at international conferences. Her name appeared on lists of most influential women, and yet, when she came home, she was just Kate. His Kate. And Philip. He'd passed operational control of his businesses to trusted managers 5 years ago, preferring to focus on philanthropy and, more importantly, on spending time with his family. Because he'd discovered something fundamental over the years. No amount of money, power, or success was worth more than the woman sitting across from him. "Remember our first dinner together?" Kate asked suddenly, her eyes shining with nostalgia. "When you showed up at my apartment with coffee and croissants. And an absurd marriage proposal," Philip added with a smile. "You should have sent me away." "I should have," Kate agreed. "But then I would have missed this. All these years. Olivia, you." "Not me," Philip said, reaching his hand across the table to intertwine his fingers with hers. "I never would have given up. I would have found another way." Always so stubborn. "Only when it comes to you." They finished dinner in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after years of true companionship. They didn't need to fill every moment with words. Just existing together was enough. But when they stood from the table, Philip didn't let go of her hand. "Come with me," he said, that specific tone in his voice that still made Kate's heart race. "Where to?" "You'll see." He guided her through the house, past the living room where they'd built 1,000 memories, past the stairs where Olivia had taken her first wobbly steps, to the French doors that led to the garden. Kate gasped when they stepped outside. The garden was transformed. Hundreds of tiny lights had been hung in the trees, creating a canopy of stars. Rose petals formed a path to a gazebo that Philip had built years ago, their special place. "Philip," she whispered, tears already forming in her eyes. "What is all this?" "Our anniversary," he said simply. 20 years since that night in the library. 20 years since we stopped fighting the inevitable." He guided her to the center of the gazebo, where soft music began to play. The same music that had played on their wedding day. "Dance with me," Philip asked, pulling her into his arms. Kate went willingly, fitting against him with the ease of decades of practice. One hand resting on his shoulder, the other intertwined with his, her face close to his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. They danced slowly, carried by the music and the love that still burned as strong as on the first day. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Philip said eventually, his voice rough with emotion, "about that day at the church. About how you were so beautiful and so broken. About how I wanted to protect you before I even knew you." "Philip, let me finish," he asked gently. "I've thought about all the moments since then. Every morning waking up beside you. Every night falling asleep with you in my arms. Watching our daughter be born. Building this life. And Kate." He stopped dancing, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "I would do it all again. Every second. Every decision. Every moment that led me to you." Tears were falling freely down Kate's face now. "Me too," she whispered. "Even that empty altar, because it led me to you." Philip held her face with both hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "You're the only forever I believe in, Philip," Kate said, echoing words she'd said years before, but that was still absolute truth. "And you're my last and best chance to live something real," Philip replied, his voice breaking with emotion. "You're my beginning, my middle, and my end, Kate. You always have been. You always will be." He kissed her then, and 20 years disappeared. They were again those two people in the library, finally admitting what their hearts had always known. The kiss was both familiar and thrilling, soft and deep, full of history and yet still promising a future. When they separated, Philip rested his forehead against hers, eyes still closed, a smile playing on his lips. "You know what's funny?" he said. "What?" "I still look at you and my heart stops. I still feel that tightness in my chest when you walk into a room. I still want to touch you constantly, kiss you for no reason, make you smile just to see your eyes light up." Kate laughed, the sound full of pure joy. "Me too. I thought it would fade with time, but it only got stronger," Philip finished. "Much stronger." They embraced under the soft light of the garden, bodies pressed together, the world distant. And then, as always, hands sought each other, mouths found each other, and sighs continued, just like in the beginning. "Come," Philip said eventually, taking her hand. "Where to now?" He smiled, that smile that still made her knees weak. "To bed, where I'm going to spend the next few hours showing you exactly how much I still love you." Kate laughed, letting him guide her back inside, climbing the stairs toward their room, the same room where it had all begun 2 decades ago. And when they made love that night, it was with the passion of new lovers and the intimacy of lifelong partners. Each touch was familiar but still exciting. Each kiss was known but still surprising. "I love you," Philip whispered against her skin, his hands tracing paths he'd memorized years ago but never tired of exploring. "I love you," Kate replied, pulling him closer, always closer. Today, tomorrow, always. Afterward, lying intertwined, covered only by sheets and moonlight, like so many nights before, they simply existed. "Kate," Philip said in the dark. Thank you." "For what?" "For saying yes, for letting me love you, for building this life with me, for being you." Kate turned to face him, seeing his face illuminated by the soft moonlight. She ran her fingers through his hair, now more silver than black, traced the lines around his eyes that had deepened with the years, touched the lips that still kissed her like she was precious. "Thank you," she said, "for waiting, for seeing me when no one else did, for loving me in a way I didn't even know was possible." Philip pulled her closer, kissing her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "Another 20 years?" he asked. "Another 50, Kate corrected. "Deal." They fell asleep like that, intertwined, complete, exactly where they were meant to be. And if someone had walked into that room and seen those two, grey hair, expression lines marking faces that life had touched but not broken, hands intertwined even in deep sleep, they would have seen something rare, true love, the kind that lasts, the kind that overcomes everything, the kind that begins with a look in a church and never ever ends. Because some stories aren't about how they begin, they're about how they continue, and continue, and continue, forever. And this one? This story was just beginning, even after 20 years. Sometimes love doesn't come when we expect it. It arrives in the most unlikely moments, at an empty altar, in a look that spans 7 years, in a proposal that should be just strategy, but becomes surrender. Kate and Philip discovered that the greatest stories aren't the ones that follow the perfect script, but those written with courage, patience, and the boldness to believe in the impossible. They proved that it's never too late to start over, that true love is worth waiting for, and that sometimes the right person was there all along, just waiting for the right moment to step in. And you? Are you willing to recognize when love is knocking at your door, even if it arrives in a way you never imagined? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and become a member to get early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was really worth listening to, also click the Super Thanks button. Your gesture makes all the difference and helps us continue bringing narratives that move you.